Jerry Agar continues. In-depth radio. News Talk 1010.
So I don't know very much about telescopes. Okay, I don't know anything about telescopes. But I think a telescope that's maybe about 3 inches, that's a pretty good sized telescope, isn't it? What if you had one that was 30 inches across? That's a honking big telescope, isn't it? Well, the Canadian government is apparently about to sink some of your dollars into, get ready for this, a 30-meter telescope. I'm going to say that again, a 30-meter telescope. That's 3 first downs, okay? That's a honking big telescope. Amateur astronomer Harrison Ruess joins me now. Hi, Harrison.
Hey, Jerry. Good to talk with you.
Good to talk to you again. What are we trying to do? Set up to burn a hole in Mars?
Nothing like that at all. This telescope, aptly named the 30-meter telescope, is one that's been in development since about 2003, and actually there's already been about $30 million of Canadian money spent in the design and development of the project. And then the announcement a couple days ago from Prime Minister Harper was that Canada is going to fulfill its funding commitment, and it's going to commit about $240 million over 10 years for construction and operation of this new telescope that's being built on top of a mountain in Hawaii.
But not entirely by Canada. Canada is a partner. Is that the case?
Yeah, that's right. With a lot of these sort of mammoth projects, certainly when it comes to space, international cooperation is important. The entire project costs something like $1.5 billion, and so dividing it amongst several groups and nations makes it more manageable. The project's led by the University of California and Caltech. They have a stake of about 25% in it. Japan's on board with about a 20% stake. Canada's in the 15 to 20% range. And China and India each are on board for 10% each.
Has the U.S. come in on this?
Not formally yet. There have been.
Well, it's in their country. Why shouldn't they kick something in?
They are. Well, I mean, they spend enormous amounts of money on this sort of thing. The big thing that they're spending money on right now in terms of observatories is the James Webb Space Telescope. It's something like an $8 billion project that's led by NASA, though the Canadian Space Agency is playing a part in it as well. It's one of the partners. But that's gotten a lot of the focus on the U.S. side right now. There is talk that the National Science Foundation, that would be sort of the U.S. government's arm for this, is going to kick in some money, but it hasn't happened yet. But as I say, the U.S. government spends lots of money on this, so I don't think anybody can point too much of a finger if they're not spending big bucks on every telescope that gets built. It's interesting, in terms of a 30-meter telescope, I think a little bit of context is important. 30 meters is about half the size of an NHL hockey rink. It's about the full size of a professional baseball diamond infield. So if the telescope were centered on the pitcher's mound, it would basically fill the infield. And this telescope really is a generational leap forward in terms of what telescopes can be able to do. The largest telescope on the face of the Earth today is 10.4 meters. 30-meter telescope is going to be 30 meters, so of course 3 times the diameter. But that gives you something like 10 times the light collection ability. And compared perhaps to the Hubble Space Telescope, that's one that lots of people are familiar with. Hubble, its big advantage isn't its size, it's that it's in space. Hubble only has a 2.4 meter diameter mirror. So this telescope, TMT, is going to collect 144 times more light than Hubble, and it actually is going to have 10 times the resolution that Hubble has.
The difference being, though, that it has to peer through the atmosphere first, whereas the Hubble doesn't have to do that.
Yes, but there's actually a new piece of technology that's just been around for a few years, actually, that's going to help solve that, and the technology that a couple telescopes have been retrofitted with. But TMT is going to be the first telescope ever designed from the ground up to incorporate something called adaptive optics. And what that is that there's a couple mirrors within the telescope that can be deformed, and they can be deformed in a very precise way, in a very particular way, in real time, that allows the telescope to compensate for the distortion that the atmosphere produces. So it's not exactly like being in space, but it brings it awfully close. And it's also atop a 4-kilometer high mountain, and so it's above the thickest part of the atmosphere and above most of the cloud cover and weather. So this is a telescope that is unlike something that humanity has ever seen before. And, yes, we're spending some money on it. It's going to be about $24 million per year for 10 years. It may not be exactly even over the 10 years. I suspect it may be front-end heavy a little bit when the construction ramps up. But in the grand scheme of government spending, it doesn't strike me as a huge amount of money. And I think the payoff for what this thing is going to be able to do and try to solve questions about is worth it.
Well, the way the Ontario government throws money around, it doesn't seem like a lot of money. But
the Ontario government could fund this project all on its own with a canceled gas plant.
Harrison Ruess is with me, amateur astronomer, and we're talking about, you heard him say TMT. If you just joined us, it stands for 30-meter telescope. A number of nations are paying to build this thing. Canada will put in about $243 million. Why do we need this thing, Harrison?
Well, it's essentially to answer the next set of questions about the universe. Why is it here? Why is it shaped the way it is? And then try to help answer questions about, are we the only things living in it? The current set of telescopes that's out there in the world or in space have brought us pretty close to being able to understand the answers to those sorts of questions. But they're just not powerful enough. They don't collect enough light to see the early moments after the Big Bang, to see that far back in time, the very faint light sources. They're just not big enough to see it. And then they don't have the resolution, the detail to be able to pick out the information that astronomers need to try to answer these sort of fundamental questions about our existence.
All right, so let me play devil's advocate with you here. Don't we have a lot of pressing problems right here on terra firma that we could spend that money on?
Absolutely, we do. And I think this sort of investment is an excellent way to start to tackle some of those problems. An issue, for example, facing the Canadian economy is that we're often, certainly in Ontario here, based on manufacturing. And one of the pushes lately has been able for us to attract high-tech manufacturing because that's where the world is going. This sort of investment is what lays the groundwork to attract those sorts of people to work here. When you have universities that have access to a telescope, like what the 30-meter telescope is going to be, those universities can attract the best researchers. Those researchers then attract the best students. And so if you have those sorts of people here, it's important. The other thing is that the money that's being spent on this telescope is money that's going to be spent by and large in Canada. It's going to be spent to build the dome structure for the telescope. That's going to be built out in British Columbia, this big, massive steel structure that will support the telescope and protect it from the weather. The other part is what I mentioned earlier, the adaptive optics. That's actually something that's going to be sourced by the National Research Council of Canada. And this is something that actually Canada has a great deal of experience in. It's something that we've certainly distinguished ourselves as a nation as being very good at. And this isn't the first mission that we've been asked to participate in this way, and it certainly won't be the last. There are other ones on the work in the works, I should say, as well.
Yeah, so it's not an issue of $243.5 million Canadian dollars will be sent down to employ Americans to build the thing in Hawaii.
That's right, exactly. Some of it will be spent in Hawaii, some of the operating costs and so forth, but the bulk of it is going to be spent in Canada or Canadian jobs for Canadian technology. And then it will, of course, with Canada having this 15 to 20% stake in it, it means that Canadians will have that access to this telescope that other nations won't. And so then this is how those universities, the research institutions, can attract the best researchers, the best students, so then they can make these sorts of discoveries. And I think there's a sort of a little bit of nationalistic pride in having a Canadian stamp on these sorts of discoveries that are going to be coming in the next generation.
The 30-meter telescope to be built in Hawaii, Canada cooperating in it, then you could go down there and you could get inside that thing and you could say, wow, you can see Canada from here.
Yeah, that's right.
Harrison,
Canada on the moon.
Yeah, Harrison Ruess, thanks so much.
Happy to chat, Jerry.